Good evening. It is June 21st, 2021. I'm Dwight Otwell, Chair of the Raleigh Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission, and please welcome to the full meeting of the Commission today. First, we will start with our approval of the minutes from our last meeting. And if you will take a second to review the minutes, I will call shortly for a motion to approve. And if anybody has had a chance to take a look at them, and hopefully you've studied them before now, let me see if I can pull up a view that shows everybody at once. But let's go ahead and see if we have a motion to approve. I got a motion. Is there a second? All right, I'm really struggling with this screen here. Give me a second. If anybody can else see a second, can you go ahead and help me make the call?
Dwight, I see a second, I believe, from Commissioner Woodall. I forget who made the initial motion, but I
saw Brian make it, and from Commissioner Woodall, that's great. And I'm still looking for the screen because it would be nice to see everybody when we all vote, right? Show all set names. All right, well, I'm going to fix this, but first we'll take the vote. So all in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye. And are there any opposed? And I will scroll down. Great. No. Let's go ahead and have a unanimous vote to approve the minutes from last month. Thank you very much.
And do you see the layout?
I do.
If you go to grid.
There we go. All right. I just switched from to a new computer, so I had an app installed on my machine, but today I'm on the web app, so it all looks different to me. So thank you. And you'll also have to forgive me for messing up the agenda because I skipped introductions. I introduced myself, so everybody knows who I am. If you'll allow me to go back a step and we'll do the introductions correctly. Moderating the meeting today is Mr. Eric Lamb. He is the city's Transportation Planning Director. We also have from the city staff, we have Paul Black, who is our Bicycle Pedestrian Manager, and we have Barbara Godwin, who is our Micromobility Manager. And let me see, I believe we had some other folks on staff, but they'll come up as their presentations roll, and we will introduce them to that time. Our Vice Chair, Elizabeth Alley, has an excused absence tonight, so she will not be present. And I'm just going to roll through the list and ask you to introduce yourself and state what committee you serve on, please. So I see Brian first.
Good evening, I'm Brian Thomas. I'm on the Community Outreach and Engagement Committee.
And Mr. Nick Neptune.
Nick Neptune, Outreach and Engagement.
And Mary Jo Gellenbeck.
Mary Jo Gellenbeck, Planning Committee.
And Joe Caruso.
Yeah, Joe Caruso, Policy Committee.
Kari Barsonis.
Hi, Kari Barsonis, and I serve on the Policy Committee as well.
Liz Hester.
Liz Hester, I'm on the Planning Committee.
Kier Tong.
Kier Tong, Planning Committee.
And Ms. Susan Hatchell.
Susan Hatchell, Outreach Committee.
I believe I also saw on the line today we have Ms. Christina Jones, who is our Greenway or Parks Advisory Board liaison. And so I know she's been making the effort to get to our meetings. I don't think she's a panelist, so she can't speak right up, but I'd like to welcome her to the meeting.
Hi guys, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Great.
Mike, did you catch Kelly?
Did I skip Kelly? I'm so sorry. Kelly Woodall, please.
But not least.
Definitely
Outreach Committee.
Yes, definitely not least. Sorry about that. I'll make the excuse that the screen was switching around on me, so hopefully I'll get a pass. And we have approved the minutes from the previous meeting. And so now we will move on to public comments. And I believe we did have some folks that were intending to make comment today. So do we have anybody, Mr. Lamb?
Yes, sir. First, let me bring up Amanda Johnson.
Amanda, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is Amanda Johnson. I live at 2270 The Circle, and I think I've been here. This is maybe my third time stopping by to see y'all. Just wanted to see, kind of express my continued concerns about the speeding and lack of crosswalks on Glenwood, and just to see if there has been any updates from the group.
I will say this is something we bring up in our meetings frequently, and I'm under the impression that there have been talks with NCDOT, but I have not heard any specifics. I don't know if Mr. Black or Mr. Lamb have anything to follow up with or not.
So what I can go ahead and tell you now, announce this later, but as part of the City Council's budget deliberations, there was a request to add a new project into the mix as part of the adopted budget. And so Council has directed staff to work on developing a streetscape project for the area around 5 Points and all of the surrounding streets. So we haven't exactly worked out what the limits of that will be relative to Glenwood Avenue. But the intention is to look at more pedestrian-friendly measures all around the 5 Points area, and to look at doing extensive streetscape work that would improve safety. Council has also asked us to look at options for roundabouts at this intersection, so we'll be studying that. And then the third portion was looking specifically at improving the connectivity between 5 Points and the Crabtree Creek Inlet. So we are just in the very beginning stages of getting organized in that project. We intend to have a consultant on board later this year, and then we'll start engaging with the public. So we're excited to bring that one forward.
I'd like to thank you for your continued. I'm sorry, please go again.
I was just gonna say, I said I appreciate that update. Thank you for letting me know about that, and I appreciate you letting me keep coming back and bringing it up for sure.
I was going to say thank you for continuing to bring this issue to us. We really appreciate the engaged public, and I think that you should take heart that you're being heard, not only here, but I know that the staff and council are talking about this and do see the issue. I don't know on what kind of time scale you'll see improvements, but I think the good people are working on the problem. So I urge you to continue to keep up your diligence in coming to these meetings and getting to council's meetings and lobbying NCDOT, and do everything you can, and we're in it with you. Thank you.
So Mr. Chair, your next speaker is Daniel Harrington. Daniel should be unmuted.
Hello, Council. My name is Daniel Harrington. I'm just calling to express my concern over the lack of any bike lanes, but also protected bike lanes around P Street, particularly on the steep downhill area from the Glenwood Avenue towards Capitol. I was actually involved in a bike crash there on Saturday, and that is a pretty challenging area to bike. There's a short bike lane in front of the new Publix, but even under that new reconstruction, they didn't make it protected. And that bike lane only exists for maybe a block and a half or 2 blocks before it ends. Suddenly you have to merge into traffic. Bike lane also doesn't exist at all on the downhill section there between Glenwood Avenue. And there's a bunch of steel plates in the way, so it's a challenging area to bike. The cars there can't see bikes coming down the hill or cars, and so they're able to make a U-turn and go back into the Publix parking deck there. And that's basically where the incident occurred for me, is they made a U-turn, didn't see me coming down the hill, turned into the Publix parking station without a blinker, and I was sort of the victim of that issue. But it is just a challenge biking up and down P Street. I've noticed it being dangerous, and this is frankly the last time I'll do it, because it's the bike lanes come and go, and traffic is pretty aggressive in that area, and it's pretty narrow. So particularly on new reconstruction like they're doing in that area, it seems like putting better defined bike lanes across the entire length of P Street from Person out to Glenwood and beyond would make a lot of sense. And in particular on that downhill area, maybe making it so that people can't do a U-turn while they're coming westbound on P Street to turn into that Publix parking space, because cars and bikes coming downhill can't really see them doing that because of the railroad bridge in the way. So just calling to express my concern over the lack of protected bike lanes and bike lanes in general in that stretch.
Dwight, may I ask a question of Eric or Paul about that stretch of roadway?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Harrington for calling in about the incident he endured Saturday. I can certainly speak to personal experience, direct experience myself traveling, down Peace. I mean, it's a major thoroughfare, obviously for motorists and for cyclists, for pedestrians. I mean, there's a lot of activity, as we know, around that area. But I would love to know, I mean, maybe either A, like why there isn't some sort of bike lane, as you come down that hill underneath the, I guess it's the train there, that bridge. And if there are plans for a bike lane there. And then number two, from what I understand with the bike plan, there may be calls for, bollards or some degree of protection for the bike lanes down that way. So I'd love to hear kind of an update on, where we are, with some greater degree of actual protection for our cyclists with that new area of redevelopment. Maybe Paul or Eric can take that.
I'll be happy to try and answer that. And first of all, let me express my concern for Mr. Harrington and the crash that he was in over the weekend. We don't like to see that happen. We do whatever we can to create a safe system. So I hope you're doing okay. So I think we've talked about this in the past as far as how fast the vocabulary and the architecture of bicycle facility design has evolved in the United States in just the past 5 years. The work that was laid out for P Street that is just now being completed, the planning for that project was actually finished 5 or 6 years ago when conventional bike lanes were our standard. And so that's why there are conventional bike lanes that are in place. You can see now with our newer facilities that the city is now moving into putting out more buffered and separated facilities. But there's going to be a lag with the projects that are under construction now that were programmed several years ago under older standards before you start to see the newer standards come into place. So that's why conventional bike lanes were installed in front of the Publix. Everyone mentioned the railroad bridge. That is a significant constraint. That is a very, very tight space that we don't have the ownership or latitude to replace that bridge. That bridge belongs to Norfolk Southern. And when we were working on the high-speed rail corridor project several years ago, we made overtures to Norfolk Southern to try and fix that, and they said they were not interested. So that is a hard constraint. And then as you go a little bit up the hill, there are some businesses that have retaining walls immediately behind the sidewalk. So that whole section, both from a design and grade standpoint, is very challenged. That's one of the reasons why we have placed a lot of emphasis on Johnson Street as a preferred alternative corridor for that block. As we're doing resurfacing on P Street going forward, we're going to have the opportunity to make some additions of bike facilities and modifications to some of the existing facilities along Peace and Clark in that corridor, but we're not going to be able to fix everything. And so Johnson Street provides a nice parallel connection through there. The intersection at Johnson and Glenwood has recently been signalized, so just for a much safer crossing through there. And so we're hopeful that we will be able to attack that and create more dedicated facilities along those blocks of Johnson Street and facilitate a strong connection to Cameron Village through that area.
Eric, that's a really helpful response, and I just want to, express my appreciation for, all the work that I know transportation planning and all our engineers have to go through to get anything done. So, number one, that's again deeply grateful for it. I do have a question about, like, as a follow-up, briefly, now that I think we're sort of coming into practice with more protected bike lanes. I mean, is it possible to just sort of update plans in real time so that, we're not dropping conventional lanes when we know that's not the ideal?
Depends on the project, because adding in the buffers requires several extra feet of space to allocate. And anytime that we push, there's a domino effect of once we start to increase that footprint of paved space, We then increase the right-of-way impact, which means we have to purchase more land. It has an impact on the stormwater calculation. So it is not an easy thing to do on the fly. Once we've got that space defined, that is a hard thing to undo. Once we're in, and especially something that's either under construction or at an advanced percentage of design.
So what's the possibility of making improvements to that stretch of piece and right there in front of Publix?
We'll have to go back and look at that. I think that we may have some options there relative to the lane widths that we put in with NCDOT. We actually have a retrofit project right now that's going to add some bike lanes along West and Harrington. We're not touching that section of P Street right now as part of this next batch, but we would have that opportunity with upcoming city design projects. One of the complicating factors is that NCDOT hasn't officially finished the project yet. So some of that's still under NCDOT control. Once that project is completed, it will revert to being a city maintained street, and we'll have a fair amount of flexibility in terms of what we can do. So in terms of looking at narrower lanes and adding in buffers with that, we will absolutely have that option. But I can certainly talk to our traffic engineering staff about the option of limiting those U-turns. That's a reasonable request that we can certainly look into.
Eric, thank you. I think Commissioner Barsons has a question.
Thank you. It's actually ironic. I was driving on that strip. Well, I drive on there every day just about, but I was actually this weekend driving on Peace for whatever reason. And if I'm not mistaken, right at Glenwood, right where the hill starts to Harrington, that's where it switches from when you guys did the road diet several years ago to when it goes back to 2 lanes. Does that block have to have 4 lanes? Can you guys continue that? I guess 3 lanes because it's got single lanes and then the turn lane, and that would give you some space to do the bike lane there before it wagons out past the bridge. Would that help alleviate some of the issue?
That is a potential outcome. One of the things that we'd have to work through is what that queuing looks like and the coordination of the traffic signals, because you've got 2 traffic signals in close proximity. But that would be one strategy, is taking away one of those eastbound travel lanes and replacing it with a bike lane.
Yeah, because I know you guys did the road diet, and it just stopped right at Glenwood, and I don't know why. I mean, there might have been a very good reason why it stopped there and didn't continue down the hill, but.
May I make one other suggestion as well? This is Daniel Harrington again. Carrie took my first thought out of my mouth, but so I second that. But also coming down the hill eastbound, that lane that's most southern, I guess, can turn off onto the next street without a signal. There's just a yield sign there. And so as a cyclist, you're trying to keep up pace with the traffic so someone doesn't pull in front of you and take that cut through onto the next street on Harrington, I believe. So if they instead were forced to stop and take a right turn at the signal, instead of being able to flow through into Harrington off of P Street there, it would also alleviate the burden off the cyclist, because you're trying to avoid someone pulling in front of you and turning off. So either of those 2 changes would help make it better. But I actually thank you for pointing out the new signaling at, I think you said Glenwood and Johnson. I didn't know that was there now. So that's a better pathway.
I think Mary Jo had her hand up next, and then Joe.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not, my screen is rebooting, so I'm not quite sure, but thank you for recognizing my hand. Mr. Lamb, I do want to, Mr. Harrington, please, thank you for bringing this to the committee's attention. Mr. Lamb, I also ride that area as a mode for getting from 5 Points to downtown Raleigh. And I do know about the Devereaux Park project that's being developed. And I just think that area is we'll see an increase in different riders, young riders, female riders. And so that section of P Street, I think, will be a critical need for our community, especially since we were trying to build access to nature for those residents who live in the urban environment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I believe we had Joe, and then I see Liz.
Thank you. I just had a quick follow-up question for Mr. Harrington. You said that there was a U-turn. Can you explain where that movement was? I'm trying to think of where someone would try to make a U-turn down there.
Yes, if you are headed westbound on P Street, the light at Harrington, they made a U-turn there to then pull in the underground parking deck at Publix.
Through that slip lane?
No, there's a new median along that section of P Street in front of the Publix block. So if someone was heading westbound, you can't turn left directly into the parking garage. And it sounds like someone may try to do the U-turn maneuver there at the intersection to turn back in.
Yeah, there's access on the front, right? You can access it from P Street. Okay. Okay, yeah, because I was thinking about if there's something that we need, like, look at turn restrictions in that area, because I know a couple of those intersections already have turn restrictions, and that area does get quite congested with cars moving in many directions. So it can get a bit overwhelming if you're trying to navigate those intersections. And I also, and it was mentioned earlier, the kind of the slip lane that you have whenever you come down the hill on Peace, and you can turn right onto West Street. I thought I saw that was part of some type of program to effectively eliminate that. Did I see that correctly, or is that something that we can kind of look forward to?
Yes and no. So we did evaluate the possibility of trying to fix that corner. Unfortunately, the geometry is kind of acute, so it's a sharp angle, and there's a large nest of utility poles and boxes that are inside of that triangle. So undoing that and moving those utilities is a fairly expensive endeavor. So we do not have a project at this time to move those utilities, but that's what it would take to change the radius on that corner and get rid of the slip lane aspect.
And I believe I saw Liz Hester with her hand up.
Oh, I was just going to address the comment that Ms. Gillenbeck had about the Devereaux Meadows Park. I sit on that commission, I was sitting on the liaison, and so I did bring up the importance of having like a safe crossing into that to connect to because ultimately that will connect to the cycle track and go up and be part of like a north-south Greenway corridor. So, but if you have any questions, I think they're still taking comments on that design. So I would encourage you to go do that. And I've sent that around to the full commission, I think a couple of times now. So, doesn't necessarily help this section of P Street, but I did want to point out that like the designers are well aware that that's like going to be a big bike facility. So.
Well, and if I may, we haven't even talked about the pedestrians. I mean, you're going to see this increase in traffic of all sorts, right? You know, cyclists, pedestrians, families trying to make their way, just throughout the entire area.
There isn't a hawk signal there now, or there's not. I think there was talk of possibly putting one in.
There's no conversations of adding a hawk signal on this section of P Street. We added the new traffic signal at Harrington when we extended Harrington Street, and that's going to facilitate the access directly into the Devereaux Park for sure. But Mr. Neptune, as part of all of the construction projects we've had out there, we've widened all of those sidewalks to a minimum of 14 feet and added street trees. So those are premier sidewalk facilities we've got in the city. And that was a big goal of ours to fix that P Street underpass and make it a very walkable environment to make that connection back to the William Peace University area.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. And again, to Mr. Harrington, thank you for calling in. I think that the entire commission is with you on acknowledging the need for improvements, not only with that stretch on Peace, but with all of our facilities across the city as it continues to grow, and as we continue to see a growth in the number of cyclists and pedestrians, in our community. So, deeply appreciate you calling in, and Mr. Lamb, and then to your team, we all, of course, appreciate all the work that y'all are doing day and night, to try to make improvements in our infrastructure. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neptune. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. And I think that corridor in particular is a very important discussion. So I look forward to continuing to work together on it.
And then, Mr. Otwell, we have one last speaker, Ms. Mary Sell, would like to speak.
Wonderful. Let's hear from Ms. Sell.
Yep.
Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, wonderful. Absolutely. So really quick, of course, reiterate all those things you guys just said about Peace Street. It is one of the identified corridors for separated bike lanes throughout Raleigh. So I would love to see a better, more robust long-term strategy there. I wanted to briefly address a few points about the meeting from last month, and I should start out by briefly introducing myself. My name is Mary Sell. I work for the advocacy organization Oaks and Spokes. I wanted to identify, as you guys received your update tonight for the Blount-Person Street corridor, how the BRT project, which has significant impacts along that corridor with a shared bike bus lane, which is probably not an ideal or all ages abilities facility coming through there. That seems like a degradation of the existing bike facility to share it with buses. So I would like the commission to be thinking about how the Blount-Person Street project can be done maybe in tandem with the BRT project to ensure that we have a parallel corridor that people could safely travel through Raleigh. So I will look forward to hearing updates from Ruben during the presentation tonight. But again, just wanted to reiterate to the commission that I think it's critical that the Blount and Person Street corridors, which have underwent a very long planning process at this point, I don't think it's been a decade, but it's been close to that, where we're now in phase 2 of implementation, to ensure that the BRT project speaks to that and to ensure that we are always aiming for all ages and abilities facilities as we implement all of our transportation network. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Sell. And I believe that we were looking forward to hearing about Person Street today, but Ruben is on vacation, I believe. So we're going to be pushing that conversation off till next week. But we intend to look at those two issues together because they rely on each other. Thank you for continuing to help us sort through all our issues. All right, let me see if I can find my agenda. If there's no more public comments, I believe that brings us to the presentations portion of the meeting. And first up on the list, we have Bonnie Parker with Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization on Equity and Planning. And I'll turn it over to whomever has the control of the screen.
This is Bonnie. Can you guys hear me okay? And gals and fellows and ladies and friends. Hi there. Good evening. You may see my video. I don't see it right now, but it may happen momentarily. I have 3 other family members here in the house who are responsible for keeping our very barky dog under control, but as our many folks are used to, it doesn't always work out that well here. So hopefully the dogs will behave themselves. Thank you, Eric, for pulling up my presentation. I am Bonnie Parker. I am a public engagement planner, I should say the only one, for CAMPO, the Capital Area MPO. And I apologize, group. I should have asked Paul and Eric this in advance, how much you all already know just about CAMPO in general. So the very, very high level CAMPO overview is that we serve as the regional transportation agency responsible for helping to coordinate transportation planning in the Raleigh metro area, and that we do have a sister metropolitan planning organization that's known as the Durham, Chapel Hill, and Carlborough MPO. Together, we developed the region's long-range transportation plan, and I'll talk about that a little bit later tonight, which is a big plan that we update every 4 or 5 years, and it includes highway, roadways, it includes transit, a transit element, and it also does include bike and pedestrian, a bike and pedestrian element that's a little more programmatic. The more micro level bike and pedestrian work occurs more on the local level. But regional transportation projects we love to get our mittens into.
And many of you may already know that Paul most recently came from Campo over back to Raleigh there, Paul Black. And so some of what I'm presenting tonight, Paul is also an expert on, and I would invite both he and Eric as our staff committee. The technical coordinating committee at Campo is made up of staff from jurisdictions all across the region, and Mr. Lamb is our vice chair. So guys, if you want to chime in on anything, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. And Eric, I think we're ready to head on into the presentation. So what I was invited to speak about tonight is equity in transportation planning and how we manage it at Campo. As the public engagement planner, this is largely my piece of the pie, but about at least a third of our staff, if not almost half, work on data and technical analysis, you know, the big regional modeling and things like that, forecasting. And they also help with a lot of this work, and I'll describe how the difference between the technical analysis and what I do as we go on here. But on the federal level, one of the basic things that Campo does is we help distribute federal funds across the region when it comes to transportation planning and transportation projects. Because of that, we have to follow all federal rules. We get to follow lots of local rules as well. And one of the biggest pieces is known as Title VI. And Title VI is short for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VI with that. Title VI requires that on a federal level, all of the federal agencies work to ensure that there is no discrimination. And it originally started with race, color, and national origin. And it's not only no discrimination, but it's no discrimination in terms of disproportionate impacts based on any programs that the federal government or activities, which also includes projects, like capital projects like huge roadways. If you're receiving federal funds, it's expected that you won't be obviously discriminating and causing disproportionately negative burdens or impacts. Then as time went on, in the mid-90s, under the Clinton administration, an additional executive order came out. And I pointed out on this slide that that's administrative because Title VI is obviously statutory. But an executive order, as we've heard over the last decade, is more administrative, relating to all those federal departments, but doesn't necessarily have the same pull that something on the statutory level does. So through the executive order 12898, under the Clinton administration, they established something that we often refer to today as environmental justice. And it was specifically environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. So we've already got race, color, national origin going from Title VI, and now we're also moving into specifically looking at low-income populations as well. And again, I'm so eager to get ahead where it's less technical than this, but the next piece of the evolution here is under that executive order, it also requires that federal agencies make sure that minority, low income, but all communities are more fairly represented when it comes to public involvement. And that was a big change for federal agencies where it was not just looking to see what impacts were being made with among different populations, but it was actually saying, oh, by the way, you also need to engage with them in the decisions that you're making and the programs that you're coming up with. So that is where we started to expand a little bit more on the groups involved, and we went with racial and ethnic minorities, low-income folks, but also the elderly folks who are disabled, and also based on sex. Then, and I'm sorry I didn't put the year in here, we also had another executive order, I think it was closer to 2000, that was related to limited English proficiency and making sure that we're not discriminating, disproportionately impacting folks or leaving them out of the process because they cannot read, speak, write, or understand English. So these are our big categories under equity in terms of over the last 50 years, and then really more specifically on the federal side over the last 25, 30 years, where we've been focusing on ensuring that there has been some level of equity through our programs and what we're planning for transportation as we go down the line. Go ahead, Eric. So what does this actually mean? If you go back just one, Eric, when it comes to transportation, we have federal guidance related to, one more, Eric, going forward. We have, I'm sorry, so you did have it right. So I only threw this slide in there, the one with regard to all those definitions, that's teeny tiny text, so that if you guys get these slides later, you can see what the actual definitions are of minority, low income, what it means to be disproportionately impacted, et cetera. So that's a slide here somewhere. But in terms of transportation planning and what MPOs have to do, the idea of environmental justice and what the administration was trying to do and has continued to try to do through the US DOT is ensure these four things: that folks have access to the decision-making process. We talked about that with regard to public involvement. Realizing benefits from our transportation investments and projects that we build, that those benefits should be holistically the same for the environmental justice populations as they are for like the general population, the rest of the region as a whole, that there's no disproportionate negative impacts, and that the same goes, it was also identified specifically that there's no disproportionate share of the cost either. And go ahead there. So really quickly, one of the things that the feds require is that we have Title VI plans. And amazingly, we're not alone. Title VI plans are reviewed, and we actually have different guidance from both the Federal Transit Administration and the Federal Highways Administration. But it's pretty similar when it comes to Title VI and environmental justice. They review our plans, and every time our MPO goes under a certification review, or they could just simply come and do an audit, they check into our Title VI plans and how we're actually implementing them or following through on what we've written. Who has to have plans, though? Our NCDOT. NCDOT also has a hand in reviewing our plans because they have similar requirements for pass-throughs of state money as well. Transit providers, so Go Raleigh, Go Triangle, they also have to have their own Title VI plans. And then the MPOs in the area, which is us and DCHD. But I think there are 19 MPOs, even just in North Carolina alone. So every MPO in the country also has to have a Title VI plan. Go ahead, Eric. And that's just simply how are we going to institute some of the guidance that's given in the environmental justice and then the Title VI statute. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so our intention initially was that I would be doing the slides, and I was going to hop out to 4 different external links. I think that's going to get a little bit complicated. So I have thrown to Eric in the chat, I think Eric, if you're the host, a number of links. And I think the best thing to do is just we'll put those in chat as we go along, and or I can do it at the end, and you guys can check out these links as time permits, or if we have time here in a moment. But this CAMPO, this is the latest version of our public participation plan. Our public participation plan, also federally required, does include our Title VI and our limited English proficiency language assistance plan as well. Our public participation plan is typically updated every couple of years. We are planning to update it this fall into the winter. So I'd be happy to come back now that you guys are going to be experts on this and share with you what our updates are. But this one was actually updated last July of 2020, but that was related to COVID and electronic meetings. So I can't say it was a significant update like we will be doing this year. One of the links we'll make sure you get is the link to this plan, which is on the CAMPO website. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So inside of the plan, there's some of the more boring types of things that you would expect that would have come out of policies from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, things that are statements that we will not discriminate. These are that have to be posted on walls at Campo, in our meeting rooms, on the agenda. I think they're very important statements to be making, but they do have to, the Title VI plan has to include things like this. It also has to include like complaint forms, which we take to every meeting, and if folks show up or folks are look around the room and they're not happy with the folks that they're seeing participating or think that things could be done differently, there are complaint forms that can be filled out related, and that would be called a Title VI complaint. And there's a whole specific process that you go through that you need to look through and review the complaint and then mitigate or make changes to your policies. Go ahead, Eric. So those are some of your more regulatory things that are in there. And then there are things that are specific to our individual MPO. And this is just one example. The Campo's Language Assistance Plan, Paul, this is probably really familiar. This screen or table is from it's about 5 years old now. When we're updating our long-range transportation plan, we're going to update this very shortly as well. But basically, you run an analysis of, based on census data and based on really off American Community Survey data of the area to see, you know, what's the latest and greatest with regard to languages spoken in your region, and then you look for certain thresholds to see, you know, how significant are they, and depending on where we are, our plan is not as restrictive. I came from, I've been at Campo for 3 years, but I came from Arlington and Alexandria, Virginia, doing similar work to this. Obviously, a lot more languages there, but our plan requires that we translate most documents into Spanish, and in this case, they're just considered to be our significant documents. So today I was putting out a press release for the Triangle Bicycle Plan, and that was a significant document that needed to be translated, in our opinion. But all of the, you know, baby social media messages or different things that I might put out, I may or may not get those translated. It just depends. And cost is permitted federally to be a consideration in how many different things you translate. But if I'm in other places of the region and like if I'm over in Morrisville, I may look to translate into different languages, and it may not be Spanish. So this type of analysis that I sort of inherited from Paul is very helpful to us when we go out, so that we can ensure not only those public participation rules of ensuring that people have access and opportunity, but also to actually help us engage with people and make sure we're getting the word out. All right, next slide. So then we have something at Campo that's called Communities of Concern. And this is the typical process among many MPOs. When so the best way to describe these is using similar census data, and we use a 5-year average using that American Community Survey data again. We take all of Campo's census information, and we put together spreadsheets that tell us, that break all the zip codes, all the census blocks down by race and ethnicity, age, sex, disability. Households that are zero-car households is how we have tried to do disability in 2045, and we're doing that again with 2050. We also then use, so we break out poverty and household income. And what we do is, those are all individual populations, right? Individual communities, environmental justice populations. What we then do is we look to see how many communities in our region among those census tracts have more than one of these. So have and there are thresholds set for every single one of these different, I'll say, demographic groups. And for the ones that trigger multiple of these populations, that they trigger for, let's say, race, and they trigger for that threshold of households without cars, and they trigger for household income being lower, then those are considered communities of concern. So I hope that made sense. It's basically a compounding of populations. And we put together then maps, and that was another link that we will share with you, of our communities of concern. This is our methodology to identify where we have pockets across the region, specifically the Raleigh metro area, where we need to do additional analysis to check on impacts, burdens, benefits, and when we do our long-range transportation plan specifically, and Erica, you can go ahead to the next slide. When we do our long-range transportation plan, known as the MTP, skip forward one, Eric, I'll come back to this one. We do then what's called an analysis on those disproportionate impacts across those different communities of concern. We map out where are all the major highway improvements, new roadways going to be, where are all of the widenings going to occur, and we then overlay that on top of the map that has really exciting colors for that light up, we say, for communities of concern. And if we see disproportionate impacts, then we have an obligation to work through what our mitigation options are. That applies, we do this across a few different things, transit improvements, things like where the BRT, the different BRT lines go, and potentially CRT or light rail back in the day. All those types of projects we look and we see fixed guideway transit improvements. How do they impact those in those community of concern areas to make sure that we don't have disproportionate impacts across the region, investments that are going too much to one area and not enough to another. At the same time, negative impacts, are all of the highways, as was done in decades past, are they all going through the community of concern areas in a negative way, where the biggest negative impacts and disruption would be. So one way to see this in action is to go back and look at the 2045 MTP maps that are on our website. It's the last appendix in the 2045 MTP document, and it actually shows lines of all those projects and how they line up to the communities of concern. And you'll see where we ended up. We think that the impacts were fairly distributed across the region with so much transportation growth. That shouldn't be very hard to do that, as you can imagine. So next slide, please. Oh, can we go back to that one? And these are my last two slides. The other thing that's unique with regard to the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, our Title VI requirements do specifically impact that big long-range transportation plan, but it also impacts our 10-year, the Transportation Improvement Program, which is the 10-year set of projects that gets worked on ultimately with NCDOT, with the state STIP. We have to follow these guidelines as well of doing additional participation and making sure that opportunities to engage in these plans are appropriately robust when it comes to meeting the Title VI and environmental justice and limited English proficiency requirements. You can go ahead to the last slide, Eric. So that was a big example of how we try to assess impacts and burdens from looking at census data, identifying key populations, identifying pockets of populations, and then comparing proposed improvements and what their impacts could be. One of the final things that's a big push right now in the world, and I think this is something that you all are probably focusing on, is more what sorts of performance measures are there to actually see if this stuff is working. We've been doing it for 50 years, for 30 years, for 20 years, but in public participation is, I would at least argue, is very, very difficult to measure when it comes to success. So This, I don't think I can actually send around to you all, but I wanted to share, I did a peer review of potential performance measures of state DOTs, MPOs, and then the research literature, Transportation Research Board, and all sorts of different places of performance measures specifically related to equity and transportation planning. And when we update our public participation plan, all these acronyms are definitely tongue twisters. When we at Campo update ours here in the next few months, we have about 35 measures that we're looking at. Which ones are we going to definitely put in as required measures that we're going to start collecting? Which ones are we going to collect, but they won't be required because we're not completely certain about them yet, and how they'll play out? And then the feds and the state NCDOT would both be checking us against those measures and how we're performing as well. Those measures relate both to the equity and investments and burdens, but also public participation. And with that was a technical mouthful without all the cool visualizations. So I don't know, Paul Black, if that was exactly what you were hoping I would relay to the group. Is there anything you want me to expound upon, or anything that it makes you all wonder when it comes to equity? Mr. Chair, I'll leave it to you to let me know who we're calling on.
First, thank you very much. And we encourage pets, so if the dogs happen to wander on screen, we wouldn't mind. And next, I think I see Mr. Neptune with his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Otwell. Ms. Parker, thank you so much for being with us this evening. I just want to say briefly how much I personally, and on behalf of the commission, deeply appreciate your work. It just so happens I'm serving right now on this equity plan task force for Dorothea Dix Park. And, we've been searching for good models, good examples, and I feel like I was just witness to one right in front of me. So I hope you won't mind if I reach out to you directly to see if we could connect and maybe have you come meet with the handful of folks who are working for Dorothea Dix, how we could develop maybe a similar sort of plan, designed to kind of evolve as the park evolves and as it develops, how we can be mindful of all the various populations that, we want to see come through and participate and enjoy the park space. So again, briefly put, I really appreciate your work. It means a lot to me personally. And on behalf of the commission. Thank you.
Mr. Neptune, I met you about a year or two ago when you were getting some venture off the ground. It had to do with food. And I was very excited to think that you might someday have a community space for people to discuss things and have dialogues. And so to follow that has been a delight. And I'm somewhat plugged in, thanks to Eric and different people, to some of that work on the staff side with Dorothea Dix. And so would be delighted. We're trying to get a community of practice going in the Raleigh area around some of this public engagement stuff. And that would be both public and staff, government staff. Something, maybe someday I'll be able to get off the ground and lead at the MPO on the regional level. Thank you.
If I could just briefly respond to that, if I heard that correctly, love the sound of that, and would love to maybe, follow up and have you over here at the food hall for coffee to discuss it. And however, I could be supportive of that effort and that work, that you've acknowledged there. I'd love to be supportive again of what you're doing. So thank you again, Ms. Parker.
Thank you.
Ms. Hatchell.
Thanks so much. Bonnie, thank you so much. That was a very informative, fabulous presentation. I think it's very timely, and I think it's really important that we all kind of be talking about this. I guess I would love to have a little conversation with maybe our staff and Bonnie about the types of projects that are using that rigor that are already in our system, because we know that if it has to do with NCDOT and federal funding, yada yada. So could you guys just kind of maybe talk a little bit about the projects that would meet this criteria versus maybe projects that might not?
can take a stab at that if you want, Bonnie. So all of the major roadway projects undertaken by NCDOT are theoretically part of this process. Again, if it's purely state money, they don't have to meet the federal requirements, but the state is always looking to hedge its bets in case they need federal money. So they try to follow that process for all of their major projects. So all the big roadway widenings, even some of the smaller projects like major bridge replacements, all of that's going to go into the analysis that Bonnie talked about that looks at the entire portfolio and says, is this balanced both on the plus side and on the burden side? So all of the projects in the region go through at least that part of the scrutiny. So there may still be a bad project here, but it's balanced out by a good project somewhere else in a community of concern. And the net is that the portfolio is, is balanced and will work. Bonnie talked about the bike ped program projects being programmatic. They're kind of really small, and over the region, it's just overwhelming for Campo to try and program that. So they're done really more through text and language as a catch-all. I'm thinking about doing a follow-up as I realized that a lot of the folks here weren't on board when the plans were being done. But we have equity baked into both our pedestrian plan and our bike plan, and maybe just bringing that out and giving a presentation about where that is in our process. In fact, there's an internal city initiative called CoreStat that looks at the citywide strategic plan and pulls out specific things for staff to look at and quantify and bring back to management team. And one of those was to look at maybe making some changes to the bike plan based on equity. And the staff that are working on that contacted me and said, how are you doing that? And I said, oh, we already do that, and here's the formula. So I think a lot of it is just increasing awareness of what we were already doing. There's a lot of equity baked in already, and we just maybe haven't done a good job selling that and telling that story.
Well, thank you. That completely answers my question, and I completely agree that you probably ought to give us more updates on that and let us know where we have, kind of like you said, bake this into our processes, because I think it's really an important topic. And thank you all. It's been great.
What I'll add is, and Bonnie mentioned in the chat, the Triangle Bikeway project is another one that that touches a lot of different communities and is part of that evaluation. What we'll end up doing is, one, I really like this tool that Campo has developed for communities of concern, and Bonnie has sent me links. I will email those to the commission here shortly. But I encourage you to take a look at that tool, because when you start to look at overlaying multiples of not just racial, not just financial, but you start to lay in age as a demographic measure for equity, that really starts to get interesting. And so you'll be able to see geographic distribution of where are the communities that have the most collections and tick the most boxes. And so for us, being able to use those as one of the evaluation criteria that goes into our project selection will be how we integrate that into our next round of transportation projects.
Yeah, and it does become interesting. I know that when I was working with federal highways, age was one that we batted around quite a bit. And I used two examples, one here in Raleigh, Hayes-Barton triggers for age as a community of concern. Governor's Club in Chatham County triggers as a community of concern. And I said, given what most people think of when they think of environmental justice, can we defensively go out there with a straight face and say Governor's Club is an environmental justice community? And Lenice with Federal Highway said, based on the statute, yes. So, and again, I think, Bonnie, the age actually is statutory, and it came later. It was in the mid-70s. I don't remember the exact law, but there was one that followed that dealt with the age part of it too. I think it's buried in the document somewhere, but
I would just follow up that we already know that, Dangerous by Design has already told us that the communities of color and aged people are more at risk. And so I think, whatever we can do, I just think we just keep talking about it. And like I said, thank you so much for bringing this to us.
Ms. Hester.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, since it sounds like there's a lot of this research being baked into projects that come to us, but are there any like specific questions we should be asking when we review projects, or anything you would recommend to make sure that we're doing our job when projects come up for review? And I'm in particular just thinking like some of the bigger ones like the RT, we do have an opportunity to comment on these, pretty major projects like the Capitol Boulevard project we've seen several times. Just kind of curious if you had any advice, maybe is the right word.
I mean, I almost as much on this is a fun issue with regard to equity, and I mean that professionally, because there's your public participation element, and really working to, really challenge staff, although honestly, I am speaking to the choir when I'm talking to Eric and Paul, but really challenging staff with, and this was an issue with Arlington too. We got to a point where we asked, what groups did you go out to before, any staff report would make it out to the public? It was, what participation has occurred just constantly. And then now the next question is not just what occurred, with what, targeted populations did you look at? And did you look at the local neighborhood? Did you connect with local folks very specifically? Then, but on the technical analysis side, there's definitely using these different tools in both the planning process, but all the way down. We didn't even touch NEPA tonight or all the different types of federal requirements, but not to pivot too far off your actual question on the data, NCDOT and Complete Streets, it just seems like there are so many opportunities for the work that your committee would be interested in. NCDOT is doing so much. We're really pushing to call them on their word of making almost any project, making sure that there are complete streets elements. Is your committee, asking about that, because those complete street elements then, was equity looked at as part of that as well? And that's, there's the bigger transportation professional world saying complete streets is also all about equity. And, we need to continue to make sure that we're keeping it there. So it's some of it's just continuing to ask. I know that seems silly, but.
No, I think it's really helpful to just have some of those points brought back to our attention on a kind of regular basis. So, I think it's something we all care deeply about, but maybe, like, I personally don't know what the right questions to ask are. So this was really helpful, and so I appreciate that. So.
Mr. Caruso.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question kind of, if we kind of step back a little bit, and I'll kind of preface this saying that I understand a lot of this is unfortunately kind of constrained by federal statute and all kind of other things. But like, if we kind of step back and look at a funding and prioritization lens, I mean, my understanding is a lot of Title VI regulation is project-based. So you have a highway, you have a sewer project, you have transit, whatever. And then they say, okay, well, we want to do this project, and what does that impact? And, and then you have mitigation based off of that, which is fine. We should definitely be doing that. But I think an important piece of this, and I'm kind of just curious more of like how Campo is thinking about this and what you're doing. And, and again, some of this is kind of baked into how funding is structured at a legal level. So it's not something we can just kind of change tomorrow, unfortunately. But like, how is Campo thinking about, kind of project prioritization and funding levels? And, so you have $100 coming in, how do you think about divvying that money up? Because I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think everyone on this commission is kind of aware of the fact of how we have. I mean, if you look at our regional plans and state plans for transportation, if you look at a dollar breakdown, we're funding roads at 80, 90%, and then everything else is 10 to 15%. So if you have, if you kind of start from that base setup, you kind of have a inherently inequitable system. If you have car dependency inherent to your transportation system. So I'm wondering how Campo is thinking about that kind of going forward as you kind of prioritize projects to go into long-range plans.
Joe, I really appreciate that question. I hope you'll keep asking it over and over and over again, because this is this part to me is the next challenge. So it seems like there are a lot of performance measures out there that we can copy and build on and learn from and use. But how you do equity in prioritization is interesting. We have two different areas that I know we're doing some work around this, and Eric and Paul, I'd welcome you to also speak to this if you want. But one is we have the LAP program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's the Local Area Projects Program. We have, a certain amount, millions of dollars that we funnel to local jurisdictions specifically, or local projects. And there are quite a few bike pred projects, but we are looking, I forget who it was, I feel like it was Florida. Eric Gretchen was just talking about this. We're looking specifically at how we prioritize and give points in the system for projects that have benefits that are considered to be more beneficial in terms of equitability or equity, instead of just the widenings or different things like that. If you have some of those complete street elements, but you can show, should you get extra points if you are in a community of concern and it's perceived to be a more positive, how do you say positive, but more positive project for that neighborhood, et cetera. Is there a way to do points there? I would say comfortably, I don't think this is in the spot process at this point right now. And that's the state's big prioritization process for state projects. What they're looking right now at whether or not they're going to kibosh the current spot process for this go round and just do the next 2 years in a year. And by saying that, I'm not sure that right now they're going to be doing much to change the measures they're using for prioritizing the formula and put equity in there. We'll see. They seem to be kind of underwater with a lot of other things going on right now. But Eric, are there other examples that you can think of? The biggest thing to me that immediately came to mind was the formulas we use to give points for scoring.
Yeah, and there's a difference between, I'm sorry, I apologize, because we have a habit of using a lot of acronyms in our field. The SPOT process specifically is project prioritization that's handled for state and federal funding through NCDOT's Transportation Improvement Program. And those criteria are dictated by the legislature. So we don't have a lot of control over what those criteria are. And as you heard said, that there may be an opportunity to look at revisiting that scoring. Right now, unfortunately, congestion abatement is one of the single biggest scoring elements, even more so than safety. And that has been a frustration that we've expressed. That is an ongoing debate. At the local level, Campo receives funding allocations directly from the feds that are outside of NCDOT's immediate purview, and that's the LAP funds. And those are monies, and we've talked about these, I think, on some of our projects recently. Certain Greenway projects we've had have had some federal funding in the mix. And Campo gets to make determinations on how those funds are allocated. I think the complex, the hedge here is that equity is one factor among several that we use to evaluate projects. It would be interesting to make it just an equity-based lens, or give equity a much higher percentage of the total scoring and see what those outcomes would be. But it is one factor among several, and so there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, thank you for all that information. That's really important. That's really helpful. I mean, I would just say, kind of putting in a little personal plug, I guess. I mean, one thing that I've kind of been noticing in the last couple of years or so is a lot of organizations are kind of starting to talk more about access as a measure. And you were talking earlier about how you're going to do measures in your long-term plans. And a lot of organizations, one specifically, Transportation for America, is talking about access as a measure versus what I believe most people do now is kind of like the level of service and speed type of thing. So using that as a proxy for access. So I mean, so effectively, like if you're traveling at 50 miles an hour, then that's good, but it doesn't really take into consideration how far you're traveling. So you end up traveling faster, further, and then it kind of negates the whole thing. So one thing that I've seen recently, relatively recently, is looking at access. So like, from your house, from your job, etc. What can you reach within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, etc. and by multiple modes. So, within a 10-minute walk from my house, what can I reach? Within a 10-minute car drive, what can I reach? And then you kind of, you have this kind of matrix of all of the things you can reach and stuff like that. And I would just kind of make that as a comment. If we're going to have these metrics that we're looking at, I think that would be something that would be really helpful to look at as far as prioritization, things like that, to look at access versus just vehicle speed, for lack of a better term.
So I apologize because it should have been in my presentation. Paul, you may even recall more about this, but when we do that EJ analysis on the long-range transportation plan, at the end, a couple of the other things that I know we're doing for the 2050 are going to be looking at bike crashes and pedestrian crashes around the region and with the overlay of the communities of concern as well. And really trying to look at the context for me as one of the folks that will be communicating that out of the nature of the area, the context as well in terms of parks and density and different things that go into that can often be the reasons folks would say, well, that's, right, of course, because that's a more dense area, or this is because of all the other reasons you could write that off really easily. And similarly to exactly what you were just saying, they already do the access to a large degree with our transit planning, as you can imagine, it may be fully familiar with. And I know that as we've been through performance measure conversations over the last few weeks for the 2050 MTP, we're really looking at doing more with access and quarter mile and where we can go and how it applies.
And I know that the current MTP also looks at vehicle miles traveled reduction, which gets at some of the things I think Joe was interested in. And that's the approach that California has taken, is replacing a lot of their level of service measures with a VMT measure instead. They looked at just, what's the landscape of data we can collect and that are available and that we can use at different scales. And that was the one thing that came back that they said kind of worked across everything that they could actually calculate. And Campo does have some VMT reduction goals built into the long-range plan.
Okay, Ms. Kellenbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Otwell. Ms. Parker, thank you so much for your time to present this information. I apologize if I didn't quite connect completely, but the impression is that this is community engagement and how we're collecting data in order for making decisions in the future for our investments in transportation. And one of the area concerns for communities of concern is that they have been targeted, they've been the victims of decision making, and they don't trust the DOT's implementations. And so are you at all exploring how to build that level of trust between government and the communities, and to ensure that they are actively participating and that the DOT is working to achieve their needs as much as the DOT is trying to achieve the entire area.
Yeah, and I think some of that is actually waylays or parlays into that community of practice around community engagement. You are right, and if I was to do this presentation again, I would think I would draw an even more significant distinction between the two elements here. There is the public participation, the ability to weigh in from the beginning and making sure that it's in the transportation planning process. But also, as we move through these planning processes, whether it's prioritization or simply identifying projects, actually doing a review in advance of the potential burdens or disproportionate impacts, and then working to mitigate them. And that's a big and. You can't just do the analysis. You actually have to do something with it. And the same goes with community engagement. But are we doing something? I think we have been, my position was created at Campo 3 years ago. It was the first public engagement position in the state for an MPO. Charlotte then replicated it and now has this position. I am very plugged in with the city and with Mickey Fern and Linda Jones and what they're trying to do with regard to, the CACs no longer being in existence, but really, what's our future of public engagement here in the city. And then also with, was able to serve doing the public engagement subcommittee for Wake Transit, and establishing a public engagement policy that, has equity as a huge component of it, and continue to sit on that committee and really slog through, doing the best work we can and making sure that our Title VI plans, that we are getting them into better shape. I mean, there's low-hanging fruit across the region, and then there's these bigger relationships. I met Nick 2 years ago. I haven't seen him since. And it's not that I don't see Nick's name all over the place. I see yours, I see everybody's, but, having the time to do this work is really, and I think one of the biggest things that we need to continue to improve upon, and this should probably be my last point so that you all can do the rest of your meeting, is the role of ambassadors. And, that you all as an advisory committee, and this is Bonnie Parker speaking, not anything else, and we say the same thing to our TCCs and our staff committees on projects. We need our ambassadors to use the networks that they too have built and learn about these projects and speak on behalf of them, or, and so like for the Triangle Bikeway, I have a list of 50 people. I need those 50 people to spread the word and be ambassadors for, the work going on, because none of us have the resources to do this. But you can't just do engagement through communication blasts. And I totally agree with you that the relationships are critical. But for us on a regional level, my initial program philosophy has been leverage what you've got while you build, the rest around it. And so it's depending on those ambassadors, those advisory groups, getting in front of them as much as possible, and really capacity building that way. Just a philosophy, one tactic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for your response. I just, participating in the surveys, I'm an ever optimist. There's no, I'm always there. But there is that old saying, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice and you're out the door. Why should I waste my time with you anymore? We really
yes,
have to focus on that trust level, that by participating, you really are valued. Your time is valued, and we need your input, because we can't make these decisions anymore in the way that we have in the past. And people of color have been banging on that door, and I've heard them before City Council and saying, we've been doing this for 10 years, and my eyes popped out. They're still at it, and so we really need to know We need to speak about it. We need to say, yeah, their voices matter and they should be at the table, and we need to participate. We need to gain from their insights in order to build better in the future.
I thank everybody for the comments. Mr. Lamb?
And just a very brief follow on what Ms. Gallenbeck said, there's one other negative aspect of that, and where communities reject projects based on that history, based on distrust and fear of investment. The Durham Beltline project with the Greenway project that used a rail trail conversion project around downtown, I think is a very, very noteworthy example of that. And we've had some hints of that with some of the bike infrastructure we looked at deploying in certain communities where there's concerns that's not what the community is asking for. So it's something we are certainly very sensitive to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Lamb.
If I could follow Mr. Lamb's comment, because that's a topic near and dear and of great concern. I think that whenever there is, coming from, communities that historically have been underserved, under-resourced, and, perhaps mistreated, right? Whenever we do hear from various communities a bit of antagonism as it relates to investments in infrastructure or, greenways and perhaps the sense of, this is a death knell for our community to come. I'd like to think that those are opportunities to double down on engagement and inviting people into a conversation as to the issues related to the built environment, in the backyard, in our neighborhoods. Because, I'm a big believer that people aren't, coming out the womb anti-bike lanes, protesting bike lanes. It's like, you don't give birth to kids who suddenly come out and they're like, I can't stand the bike lanes. No, I'd like to believe that a part of the challenge, as we've acknowledged, that there's just a history, right, and a real history of, investments in infrastructure and improvements that are sort of deliberately designed to exclude, to push out, to displace. And so I think today, moving forward, we all have an opportunity to double down on the engagement with our communities, to listen to the very real fears and concerns, and to pivot and to address them. Sometimes a part of it is, we don't want bike lanes because we have other issues. And so then it becomes, I think, a balanced conversation of, well, maybe we can move the conversation forward with the bike lane and actually address these other more immediate, more pressing concerns. I'd like to believe that, there's a lot of folks here tonight, are here for that conversation and here for that engagement. And I certainly feel encouraged by, Mr. Lamb and Mr. Black and Ms. Parker in terms of what y'all have acknowledged as far as, the efforts made to previously, before tonight's conversation, before, the recent months of activity and unrest. I mean, there's been an ongoing effort for a number of years now to increasingly acknowledge the gaps and the disconnects between, where the city is, where various communities are, and how we can strengthen those ties and strengthen opportunities to engage in conversation with each other as we seek to make improvements in our growing city. So, yeah, all that to say, deeply appreciate the work and deeply appreciate, again, Ms. Parker and our colleagues with the city who are making every effort to do, the best they can with what they got.
I would like to thank you, everybody, for your comments. And Ms. Parker, this has been wonderful. We've been trying to figure out how to get at this as a commission for quite a while. It's great to actually see this being applied in a real way and having it spelled out in the planning world for us. So this has been eye-opening, and I've learned a lot. Thank you. I believe that if anybody has any more comments, I'm going to have to ask you to follow up individually. We're going to need to go ahead and take a quick break. So I'm going to call for a 10-minute break. It's now 7:30, and we will come back at 7:40, and we will pick up with the Greenway presentation, safety presentation. So unless there's any pressing needs from our moderator, I'll see y'all in 10 minutes.
And then Eric and Paul, do you guys have what you need from me in terms of links? Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, we're good. Thanks so
Molly.
much.
Appreciate it.
All right, Paul, I hope that's what you were thinking.
That was exactly what I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Invite me back anytime to talk engagement.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Eric, does it count decorum when they're on the line but not muted and not no video?
I think the safer bet is to have everybody back on. Okay, you got quorum.
It was just theoretical. That's close enough. It's been about 10 minutes. We'll let Pierre catch up. So moving on with the presentations. Next up on the list, we will be receiving a Greenway Safety report from the Parks and Recreation Department. And did I see that, is it Stephen Bentley that's going to be on the line for us?
Yes, it is, Dwight. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming. I've been looking forward to this, and I had a chance to review the document earlier today, so please take it away.
All right. I see my camera is not on. I'm trying to get it on here. Well, maybe I had an upgrade today for Apple, so maybe that did it. Eric, do you want me to share, or will you share the? I don't hear you.
I've got it, and I can share it right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving me time on your agenda. I'm Stephen Bentley. I'm one of the assistant directors in the Raleigh Parks Department, and I'm standing in today for Lisa Schiffbauer, who leads our Greenway Planning and Design group, so I got big shoes to fill here. I'd like to thank Commissioner Otwell, Commissioner Hatchell, Neptune, Hester, and maybe some others that I had missed, because they did join calls of our Greenway subcommittee this spring. I apologize in advance to them because this is going to be a lot of review for them. But for the rest of the commission, I hope you find this informational, and I'm happy to take any questions either throughout or at the very end. I got about 25 slides. Next slide, Eric. So my presentation is going to cover Greenway safety from 4 different perspectives. Note that you all did get a report. That was a draft report I shared with your chairperson and Paul Black this afternoon, more of the final draft, so they could distribute that to the commission as well. But we're going to talk about Greenway safety from a planning and design perspective, safety and education outreach the city does, some of our O&M, or in this case, it's written as M&O. And then we also had RPD involved in our discussions on Greenway safety, and they shared some of the work that they are doing and going to be doing, and then ultimately some recommendations. Next slide. I think you jumped one, Eric. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we define safety from 2 different perspectives. One, the personal safety, so your general recognition and avoidance of possible harmful situations as a person, and then like the physical safety of our Greenway system. Obviously, why do we focus on safety? It influences your decision whether you're going to use a Greenway, your experience in the Greenway, and overall a safe Greenway system will encourage more ownership and stewardship of our Greenways. Next slide. So the first section we're going to go through is planning and design. Next slide. You heard a lot of acronyms in your previous presentation. I'll just continue with them. A lot of these are going to seem familiar to you. We utilize national design guidelines for the development of our Greenway system. We also rely on the expertise of the 2 staff members that are on this call and the remaining staff members in transportation, but Eric and Paul are extraordinary valuable resources for the development of our greenways. But we use follow ADA guidelines, AASHTO, the uniform traffic control devices, and then we also look at how we can utilize some of the methods of SEPTED throughout our greenway system. Next slide, please. Continuing, we use state guidelines. You heard from Campo earlier, local guidelines. And then others is, really I highlighted on here is that what informs the planning and design of our greenways from a safety perspective is really hearing from users, hearing from your commission, and then what we did in the past. Did it work or didn't it work? So learning from our prior successes and our prior failures. Next slide, please. This is just some photos. Go back one. There we go. This is just some photos of how we've been focusing recently on through design, improving the safety of our greenway system is by having improved signage, better wayfinding. As you know, our greenways are really focused on they are developed in the riparian corridors or the creeks of the Raleigh system. So instilling a lot of new handrails, focusing on the curvatures or visibility of our greenways. Vertical barriers are both good and bad for pedestrians and bicyclists. One of the big things we are doing now is that as we replace bridges, we are looking at using concrete bridges versus wooden bridges. Next slide. We also are looking at improving and creating more pavement markings, and I'll talk a little bit about budget at the end. How we are working with the overall transportation system from a multimodal perspective and how we are crossing at grades. Where we are placing amenities, what amenities we are placing, overall creating a better experience so people feel the comforts of the trail. And then looking at our tunnels to create more opportunities for expression and placemaking all around. You feel better when you're going through a lit tunnel that has that was painted or created by a local public artist. Next slide, please. So just wrapping up planning and design, we are currently in the process of upgrading the last remaining 9 unlit tunnels. We're starting with the 3 along the Walnut Creek corridor. Those that currently have lighting, we are looking at changing those up or upgrading those as well to LEDs. We're working on when we are doing repaving projects, when it allows for in budget and in scope and in the appropriateness of the trail, making some of the trails wider. And then we'll be doing a lot more pavement marking in line and striping later this fall. Next slide. So one of the things that we've increased over the last few years is our discussion about safety, education, and awareness and outreach through our different media channels, both online. If you go to the next slide, we did a campaign this past spring. We did some temporary signage. We've also made some permanent signage improvements. Our giveaways through our marketing program are now bike bells. I know a lot of people are interested in and have been signing up for our closure alerts in our map feature, which we've created the last 2 years. So you can subscribe to a text service that tells you when trails will be closed. Next slide. The campaign that we did this past spring focused on staying to the right, passing on the left, staying alert. We find more and more when we talk with Greenway users that have had conflicts or with our friends in RPD. A lot of issues we have had people that because they have their they were looking at their cell phone or they had their headphones on. We're really trying to focus a lot more on speed, and you can see that we'll be launching some new signage that have different messages related to speed. And then just, again, we're really trying to push people to sign up for the Greenway Alert program. Next slide. This is one of the signs that I was talking a little bit about earlier, that in order to reduce some of the clutter and having multiple signs, we're combining some of our signs to a human scale that will have not only the speed limit, but some information about, basically vocalizing before you're passing someone. So I'd say this is, over time, what we've done is we've created a great Greenway system, and now we're learning on how people use it. Obviously, this past year, we've seen more usage. Actually, our trail counter showed that during the peak of last summer, we had 300% increase on some of our Greenway locations. Next slide. This is some of our signs that we feel like that are definitely overdue, which is really focusing on the destinations along the Greenway. So where people are, from a simple subway map down to how far is it, how far are you away, whether it be another park or a shopping center or some other point of interest. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. This is the interactive map we have online. There is a video that I'm going to skip from going through. It's a 3-minute video, but we do have different videos online that we plan on updating over the next year. But it's focusing on safety and etiquette rules, regulations, and also promoting the Greenway Safety Volunteer Program, which I'll cover a little bit later, that RPD heads up. Next, I'm going to talk about our maintenance and operations. So the key component of the success of our Greenway system is the ability to be nimble and be responsive to the inundation of water, which seems to reoccur more and more often over the last few years. Next slide. We actually have 4 different crews that work on our Greenway system, and they're related to construction, grounds maintenance, structures, and vegetation. So we do a lot of in-house quick repair. Anything that requires like sealed drawings, we'll publicly bid. But we have staff of all different skill sets that allow us to go out and make very quick repairs in a timely fashion, as well as respond very quickly to storm response. Next slide. So those 4 crews are they are responsible for the maintenance and operations of a haul 117 miles. They do in-house a structural check of all structures and concrete and vegetation, twice a year. Every 5 years, we have professional engineers inspect our 326 boardwalks and bridges. After all of our storm events, our staff goes out. We have different methods of inspection. The one thing that we really boost and have increased the last couple of years, which helps with real-time data, is that our staff are using mobile devices to capture what has occurred from a condition or a storm or a repair need. And then that gets basically cataloged, and we can see at real time in any dashboard where our maintenance needs are, so we can be as quick and nimble as possible. Next slide, please. This again just shows you, we had 3 storms, as you know, in 2019 that really took its toll on a number of our structures and our pavement and, and inundated our tunnels multiple times in 2018 and 2019. Next slide. One of the primary things that we have focused on is the 4 crews that I talked about now have a more regimented program of power washing. All of our structures those structures that need it after a storm event. We've learned that the utilization of wood and the factors of pollen and mud and rain and humidity all compound into very slippery boardwalks and bridges over a certain period of time. So we've been putting down a lot of traction tape and trying and testing different products on our stairs and our boardwalks. But over time, what we're going to have to do is make the investment to change those structures out, and it'll take quite a bit of time to different materials than wood. Next slide, please. So the one thing I do want to point out is that we have made a really focused effort to partner with our natural resources and arts section within the Parks Department and different city agencies to promote improved placemaking opportunities, provides more of a sense of ownership on the trail by planting wildflowers. We actually had 4 different plots of wildflowers last year. And what we found is that more eyes and more people on the trail usually creates for an environment in which people look, call, and report information. Now, you know, that you juggle that in both directions. You now have new users of the Greenway, which you have to work through outreach and communication on what you do on a Greenway and what you don't do on a Greenway. And then finally, the last section, this would normally be covered by Major Derek Dyke, who leads the section that oversees the Greenway patrols. Next slide. So the Greenway Volunteer Program was established 9 years ago, and currently they have a 50% reduction in volunteers. Since COVID set in, the numbers are down. Predominantly, the reason for that was a lot of the volunteers related to the Greenway program were seniors or retirees. They have cell phones and report issues to the police department, but they give away a lot of Greenway maps and report a lot of our maintenance needs as well. What we're going to continue to do is promote this program and work closely with our Adopt a Trail program. So the combination of Greenway volunteers and Adopt a Trail program, we're hoping over the next few years will help increase both real and perceived safety. So the data, next slide, the data in which RPD uses is basically collected through calls. Through those calls, they map out and overlay data based on different types of calls they get. And essentially, those are the locations which they use that trend data to deploy more of their patrols throughout the city. On the next slide, you'll see the top reported issues that are along greenways, which is larceny from a motor vehicle. Most of them, most calls that come in are related that people want to talk to an officer based on suspicious behavior. And then the third one is damage to personal property. They do have a program that they encourage is to keep all your personal belongings out of sight and to make sure you lock your car. We have put a number of these signs up more and more, not only in our parks, but in our Greenway trailheads, just to remind people that when you leave, your vehicle is probably going to be out of camera's way because we don't have a lot of outdoor cameras in our park system. Next slide. So this is just the summary of the 20-plus page report that we have developed, which we've distilled down that Greenway safety is the #1 priority for the city. That we need, as a Parks Department, we need to do a better job at working with other agencies and other departments, working closer with nonprofits or for-profits for the volunteer program. Continuing to utilize our national best practices for design. Continue to promote Greenway safety through all forms of communication. Next slide. one of the things that we want to begin to do is to create a narrative on how Greenway users, it's a community, so support one another, look out for one another. Excuse me. Over, unfortunately, the last 2.5 to 3 years, we have seen an increase on those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So how is the Raleigh Parks Department working with nonprofits and government agencies to help those who are unsheltered? And then ways to look at that right balance of public art, programs, road races to bring more eyes and more activation to the overall Greenway system, to celebrate the Greenway system. We really want to push and promote the Greenway volunteer program to get those volunteer numbers back up. And then make sure that we're continuing and evaluating our safety practices so we don't get stuck of doing the same thing all the time, because crime becomes more sophisticated, and we got to make sure that as a city we're positioning ourselves for users always have a safe experience. And the last slide that I just put in is, one more slide, Eric. Yep, thanks. So we actually received $900,000 in this year's budget. And that is going to continue for our department to finish up or to further look at the tunnels that are not lit, as well as provide some additional striping and signage for those areas that we have the most user conflict. The biggest success that we had in this past budget year is that the council approved a penny for parks and greenway maintenance. That is $7.6 million. And if you add the other funds that we receive from facility fees and other revenues, it brings our department up to about $9 million a year. We average about $5 million, so it almost doubled our budget. That's an extraordinary opportunity for us to really create a better experience for all of our users on the Greenway. And I did not put in a bullet, but the police department got a Greenway unit. They have approved 6 officers and various resources that will be a Greenway patrol unit. That's the last slide. I think the last one that says questions. Oh, sorry. It has my contact information, but more important, it has Lisa's. But you can always call or email me as well. And Chairman, I will look to you for questions. And I apologize, I can't get my camera to work here, so.
Well, it's quite all right. We're used to the presenters not having the camera. I don't think it will bother us much at all. Okay. Thank you. That was a great presentation. I enjoyed seeing the updates and seeing the document evolve. One thing this has made clear for me is how much the question is much more, I think, about physical safety than personal safety on the Greenway Trail, though they're both important. There's the personal safety on the Greenway Trails. In Raleigh, we've been very lucky to have very safe Greenway trails in that regard.
Yeah.
So I would welcome questions. Mr. Brindley, would you please give a quick summary of where this process is and when you're going to be going to council, and if you would.
Yeah, thank you, Dwight. That tees it up perfect. So the council asked us approximately 6 months ago, so it was right before the holidays, they referred this item to the Parks Board to review the current practices of Greenway Safety and look ways to approve it. So what we did is we worked through our Greenway Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Parks Board, invited members of your commission to participate. This draft report was reviewed and approved by the Park Board last week. And we plan on taking it to the Raleigh City Council on July 6th. So July 6th, it'll be a report and recommendation of the Parks, Recreation, and Greenway Advisory Board. However, we will ensure that the council is aware that we reviewed it with the BPAC or the commission.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make clear, we've been sharing this document as it evolves with the commissioners, so I welcome all comments. Never stifle what you want to say, but it's very late in the game for any significant changes. So, but with that caveat,
I did get a lot of, yeah, no, I got some good comments the last few weeks, so thank you for continuing to, for everybody that did reach out.
Excellent. And Mary Jo is first off the start, so if you would please lead us on.
Thank you, Mr. Otwell. And Mr. Bentley, thank you so much for the presentation. I just want to give one feedback with the police presence, only in that is if there's a working relationship and guidelines on how the police are to respond or behave with the users on the trail. There is evidence and data research that shows that communities of color are by racial concerns. And I really just want to make sure that the police aren't stopping somebody just because they have a suspicious look about them, that the police are there so that people who are in need can approach them. I think their presence is important. I support the police. But I also feel like this is a recreational area, and I just want to ensure that everybody has feels comfortable and safe.
Yeah, I thank you for those comments. We as a department, we do have a really strong relationship with the police department, and for the most part, because we have staff, both maintenance and programming staff, pretty much at all corners of the city, we usually look to those staff to basically be that day-to-day presence. And when needed, or if needed, is when we work with the police department. But I very much appreciate your reflection.
Thank you, Mr. Bentley. Same right back to you. Thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Bentley, I got a couple of questions of my own, and I apologize because this should have come earlier, but it's just shaking things free. Every time I read the document, something new comes to mind. I would wondering if you could talk a little bit about the thought behind putting the Greenway Volunteer Board with the police department in the first place. I was a Greenway volunteer 5 or 6 years ago, and it's kind of an onerous, police-centered kind of process. There's a background check. I just went and checked the site again online, and it's still the same website that was put up in 2012.
Okay. Yeah.
It's very kind of it's an old-fashioned sign-up process. It's run by Bruce Embry, Lieutenant Bruce Embry. I think he's partially retired, so they give it attention, but you have to drive out to North Raleigh to the police station and see the man and give him your stuff. And it doesn't seem like it's would be accessible for a large number of people. And the more that I learned that this is a lot of physical safety, it seems like this would be better housed in the parks department. So like a lot of what would be most helpful from the volunteers are, where is the trail deteriorating? Where is the vegetation happening? Where is the bridges slippery? And the police are great with their presence on the Greenway Trail, but right now they don't even have a way to track their specific location. So if you call the police and say there's a slippery bridge, they can't record where that is. They can record the nearest street intersection, which is another issue that I understand that they may be working on with the Greenway unit. Is it too hard to change? Is it proper for it to be under RPD? Is this something that Parks would be interested in having something under their own umbrella? Would you be willing to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to, and I'm not sure, Dwight, of the origins, why it landed in the police department. I can say from a volunteer perspective, our department has 14,000 volunteers annually, so we're probably the leader in volunteerism in the city. Actually, I want to say I know we are. So I wouldn't rule out some type of change or adjustment. We went from a single volunteer coordinator to we have 2, and now I think we're approaching a third person. So I can definitely breach that discussion with. We have, like I said, a really good relationship with the police department, and you are right. Bruce has a certain way. He does the volunteer program. I will note, if you are an ongoing volunteer with the Raleigh Parks Department, you also get a background check. If you are a coach with you get a background check. We do so many background checks. We do our own. We don't do them through our HR department because we have so many volunteers. I took a note down. I won't shy away from asking that question, especially now that they have a unit. Maybe their role is best focused on enforcement versus ambassadors. But I can definitely ask that question.
Oh, wonderful.
Yep.
This is an unusually quiet group. I guess we primed everybody and told them to do all their questions ahead of time.
Well, did everybody eat their dinner after break or before?
I'll just quickly say that it was a pleasure to serve with the Greenway subcommittee with Parks and Recreation and Greenway Advisory Board. Learned a lot about the maintenance, the staffing, just the overall care for our greenways and the effort made to keep them up and to build them out, and deeply appreciate the work of Mr. Bentley and his office and his teams and just all the various departments that are involved in again, maintaining and growing the Greenway system. So deeply appreciate the work, and it was a real privilege to serve with them. And in fact, it was the inspiration for BPACs getting out to participate in a Greenway cleanup of our own. So, again, just deeply appreciate all the work Mr. Bentley and his team do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do think that we did have some small details that we will keep an eye on going forward, but I don't think that there's anything major, and I'd like to move that. I have
sorry, Mr. Otwell. I did raise my hand one more time.
Go for it.
Thank you.
I should have been faster.
It was a very thorough presentation. I think that's one of the reasons why. But I just wanted to emphasize the importance of visibility. That was on one of the slides as a priority, and I just want to reiterate how important sightlines are for women who are using the Greenway to increase their comfort and safety when they're using it. So I just wanted to make that on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bentley.
Can I ask someone to make a motion to endorse this report for the City Council? Get a motion from Liz Hester. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Susan Hatchell. So all in favor? And any opposed? All right, I believe that will be a unanimous endorsement of the report going to the City Council.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the commission as a whole and all you do for Raleigh. And I also, again, can't say enough about the staff that work with you, both Eric, Paul, and the remainder of the team. So have a great night. You have my email information. If you have any questions related to parks or greenways, just call me or send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen.
Excuse me. Okay, moving on down the list of presentations, we are going to be putting off the Blunt Person 2A conversion project update. Mr. Moore is out of town this week, and that brings us to the Bus Rapid Transit New Bern update. Last week, if y'all remember in your review of the notes and when you went home and watched the video of the meeting, as we all do, I'm sure, we were going to put together a list of the concerns we had about BRT, and staff had said that there were some quick changes that could probably come back this month. So that's why we have it on the agenda this month. We did not get a list of the stuff that we were concerned with out the door quickly. Joe and a couple of us have been working on such a list, and we have one to talk about now. I don't know if staff was able to come up with any of the quick changes that we were talking about. So, Mr. Lamb, yes.
I believe Ms. Hatchell, I believe you need to be recused in this case. Is that right?
I do, please.
Please. Yes, I would make a motion to recuse Ms. Hatchell. Can I have a second? Second by Liz Hester. All in favor? And all opposed? And we get none. That'll be unanimous. And please join the peanut gallery, and we'll call you back in a few minutes.
See you later.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair, I have a copy of the draft letter that was prepared. If you'd like me to share that, I can do that. Or if you want me to distribute it after the meeting, we can do it that way.
Let's share it, and then we can discuss it. And if it's still relevant, we can share it after the meeting. Does anybody from Go Raleigh have anything, or staff have anything to present? Any changes since last month? Okay. Well, I'd like to make this really quick. Perhaps we can put some of the substantive business off until a later meeting. Joe has been so good as to create a quick list of the issues that we discussed and the things that we think we still need resolution on. Going forward, this interacts with the Blunt Person Street, like Mary Sell talked about earlier today during the public comment section of the meeting. I think that these are really important to understand together. We've been talking to the council rep. We've been talking to Councilman Melton, and we have also had some offline conversations with the other councilors. And council has already received the report from Go Raleigh on the 65% design that we got last month. So I don't believe that there's a need for us to rush a resolution this month. Nothing's going to change here in the next couple months. I think we should take our time and look at the Person Street presentation, review the notes that Joe has started here, and looks like he might have expanded since I saw him last. But that's excellent. I think what I'm going to propose, and I'll throw this out now, and we can talk about it and maybe make a motion at the end. But I'd like to create a committee, an ad hoc committee to make a report to council over the next couple months on our position on the BRT network downtown. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Joe real quick. And Joe, if you could give a summary of the notes that you've made so far.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so this letter is, everyone can read it later, but effectively it's just a summary of our comments from last month, kind of broken out into two separate areas. One is at the top is the kind of smaller scale issues that we talked about with Go Raleigh staff last month, which they said that they were going to look at incorporating into future designs and make minor tweaks to the designs to kind of build in that feedback. So as I mentioned here, but it's not completely limited to, but the kind of the main ones were the Mary Jo's comments about bike parking and how that's handled at stations. Also, the right turn restrictions at a number of intersections was mentioned by multiple people, and the design of the current double right turn lanes at the intersection of Corporation Parkway and New Bern Avenue, which I mentioned. And then there's also second set is the what I refer to as larger scope issues. And that includes, as Dwight just mentioned, the shared bus and bike lanes that are currently planned for the downtown core for this project on Blunt and Wilmington streets, but theoretically on other streets as further BRT projects progress. And then the second item is the lack of street trees, primarily lining the center running transit way along New Bern Avenue. As I'm sure everyone knows, there's quite a lot of trees in the current in the current median on Newbern. A lot of large mature trees that are quite nice. And just as a just how the project has happened to be designed, the transit way will be installed in that median. So as far as I'm aware, there's going to be near complete removal of those trees in the center median. So the request was basically to add street trees along the transit way between the transit way and the existing roadway. And then as a final point, the lack of a bus lane and then some type of separation on the section outside the belt line on Newbern between Trawick Road and New Hope Road. As I mentioned last month, that has the westbound segment of that road is currently 4 lanes of traffic, and I would very much like to see that inside or the outside lane next to the sidewalk be converted into a bus and right turn lane, so that we can provide a little bit of separation between people on the sidewalk and the fast moving traffic. Especially because there's a number of sections on that sidewalk where there's minimal or no separation between the sidewalk and the back of the curb. A number of the sections, especially as you come up to intersections, the sidewalk narrows into the back of the curb. So there's not even like a 2-foot planting strip or anything like that in between. So anyways, long story short, in this letter basically goes over those items and says that we would like to continue working on this. And with that being said, that the BPAC does support the project overall and thinks it's a very important multimodal project for the city, but would like to see some further refinement on it. So that's pretty much it. And to Dwight's comment, this is the same thing I sent you yesterday. So it might look different because it's in Word, but it's the same thing I sent you yesterday. So, but that's basically it as far as the letter. It's just a more or less a summary of what we talked about last month.
Let me unmute here. All right, we can entertain a short discussion on this right now, but we are getting kind of late. So like I said before, I think that this could use some closer attention and a little bit broader input from the committee, from the commission, if we're going to send an official letter to council. So Joe, you've done a great job summarizing the issues that I'm aware of. Yes, Ms. Barsness.
Thanks. I actually had a quick question. I can't remember when we reviewed the BRT, I guess it was last month, if this Wilmington and Blunt, where there's going to be shared bike, or the proposal is shared bike and BRT lane, is there on-street parking on those sections of the roads where they're talking about sharing bike and BRT?
There are spots along Wilmington and Blunt where there would be limited on-street parking on the other side of the street. Does that make sense? So there would not be on-street parking on the same side of the street where the BRT lane is being installed.
Mm-hmm. So there is currently, and there would continue to be on-street parking if this proposal were to go through as is.
Only on the other side of the street. So the current proposal does eliminate on-street parking on the side of the street where the BRT is being installed.
Got it. But okay, so I'm with you. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Gellenbeck.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb, I've had some time to, I really appreciate you guys putting together the letter, by the way. Thank you so much for that. I thought about the shared bike lane with the BRT lane, and I now have concern for it. Initially I wasn't, but now I do. So I don't know if this letter that you guys are proposing should reflect only what we thought initially after receiving the presentation. Should it include some more afterthoughts that since we've had time to digest it?
So I believe that it would be perfectly acceptable, and I think that's one of the good reasons to put this into a committee. Having multiple voices and spending a little bit of time to think about it, letting us get the Person Street update to understand how that's going to impact our options and what's going to happen with the bike plan there, and then get a bunch of people working to craft a letter and a report over to council.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that'd
Mr.
be
Moore
acceptable.
presented at the council member Knight's listening session, and he showed the drawings of one particular BRT station, and we talked about the right-hand turn onto New Bern Avenue, and that the a more angular 90-degree turn would slow the traffic the driver from entering into the pedestrian lane, and he agreed. And so there's little nuances like that that we can add to this letter with this little subcommittee that we create. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes. So we will work to keep it as brief as possible because we want council to read it, but
Sure.
we'll certainly try to capture all of the concerns.
Okay, thank you. And the last but not least, Mr. Lamb, I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but I did participate in the survey that the city put out for the BRT. And I don't recall a lot of information or questions that would relate to how people would access the BRT stations. How far do they live from the station? Would they be walking? Would they be biking? Would they be using a scooter to access it? I remember a lot of questions asking about the design, the angle of the roof, the materials that are being used. Correct me if I'm wrong with my memory, but I think that we should put out another survey. If I am right, my memory does serve me, to understand people who will be using this and what they need for infrastructure, active transportation infrastructure, to gain access to the stations, either from their starting point and the end point.
So your question is that the survey did not adequately capture the user base and the potential usage of the respondents.
Yes, sir. That's what my recollection was, is that the questions did not really capture that content. That first mile, last mile challenge or solution. And now that the news is out that $5.4 million has been added by Representative Price and Representative Ross. Maybe there's a little extra money in there for the infrastructure to serve or accessing the BRT. And that's where it really kind of stems from.
Okay, so I did just receive a text from Megan Finnegan with our North Rapid Transit team, our transit division, and she's indicating there's going to be additional survey work that takes place as the small area plans are done for each corridor to capture exactly what you're asking for.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic update. I'm comforted and will sleep well tonight. Thank you. And for the record, Mr. Otwell, I'd like to be on that team.
That was going to be my next question. I don't believe that we need to take a vote to form an ad hoc committee, but it probably couldn't hurt. Mr. Lamb, do you have any input on that?
Whatever is the pleasure of the commission.
I'll just arrange with the folks after the meeting. We'll email it. And so please contact me if you'd like to be part of that committee, and we'll arrange a meeting time and set out some goals. hope that can wrap up the BRT discussion for now, but that will certainly be back in front of the full commission in the next couple months, and we'll have another chance to get at it. I believe that does us for presentations. I believe so. So we'll be moving on to reports. And first up is Chair's report, and I will keep mine as brief as possible. I'm probably going to, again, steal Mr. Lamb's thunder, but we're looking to a return to in-person meetings in July. And I look forward to it a lot. So that's all I'll throw out there. That's a big enough one, and keep it short. And we will go to committee reports and start with Pierre. Pierre, can you tell us about planning, please?
Yeah, I'll keep mine pretty short too, but we met this month prior to this meeting and we talked about wayfinding signs for neighborhood bikeways that are coming online pretty soon. So we had a good discussion about that. And that's all I've got.
Okay, and the policy is Elizabeth Alley, and she will not be here today, so I will let her give her report next time around, and that leaves us with Nick Neptune and Outreach.
Thank you, Mr. Otwell. To put it briefly, we had a great meeting this month, outreach and engagement to discuss Walktober and having a robust month of activities celebrating our pedestrian community. So there you go. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And now we will move on to staff reports. Mr. Lamb, Mr. Black, and Ms. Godwin.
I've got a few things I'll jump into. You already heard me mention one of the changes that took place with the budget regarding the 5 points streetscape planning that we're going to be undertaking. So look forward to engaging with you on that. One of the other things that came out of the budget, I believe we alluded to this at a prior meeting. It is now official that we will be adding another staff member into the Transportation Planning Division of our department, and that will be dedicated to Vision Zero. So we're very excited to have that increase in capacity. Anytime we can get cavalry, we're going to celebrate, and especially for a position that is going to be focused on this very important subject area. So I'm excited to see us move in that direction. Let's see. Paul, I'll turn over to you first.
Yeah, and I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder. B is going to give a recap of Bike Month. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Beyond that, that was pretty all-consuming. I don't have much of anything else.
So I'll go next really quick. Oh, B, are you going next?
Barbara, you go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I just have one thing, and it could fall under upcoming events. But we are hosting a scooter safety event on Saturday from 11 to 3. We'll have all 3 operators, Bolt, Lime, and Spin, present, doing demonstrations, showing people how to properly park and ride in bicycle infrastructure, as well as the vehicle lanes. They're on West Street. It'll be at the Raleigh Union Station Plaza. We'll also have Citric Cycle and Commute Smart Raleigh present. And so come out if you can and meet and greet our operators and show some support. That's all I have.
And then B.
So we had Bike Month last month, and Bike Month was very well received. We did virtual yoga, and once a week we did a Citric Cycle ride every Sunday. And we hope next year to be able to do some more bike to work day events that we've done in the past. So this was sort of our go-between, but we learned a lot on how we can engage people virtually as well as do events in person as well.
Yeah, and I should note it was yoga for cyclists. It's like, why were you doing yoga? It's like specifically targeted for people who ride bikes.
I mean, those of us that are out spin all the time in dirt like this.
Yeah, it ended up actually being, I think, my favorite Bike Month event that I've ever done. Because it's like in privacy of your own home, and you're getting like these professional level instructors, and you don't realize how tight you get pedaling. So, but yeah, this was really an interesting year. sort of half COVID, half not. And the combination really did increase, I think, a lot of our outreach, with the exception of Missing Bike to Work Day, which is our kind of the biggest event that's hosted by everybody in the region.
I just want to say real quick, thank you to all the city staff for all the work that you put into making Bike Month happen. It was really appreciated, and it is an unusual year. So thanks to all of you.
Yeah, I had a great time. The events that I was able to make it to were excellent. So appreciate it. Ms. Gallenbeck.
Yeah, I'd like to just give a shout out to Ms. Pearson, who did an outstanding job. I really enjoyed working with her on the traffic garden, and she makes a difficult job look easy, and you got to be on your game in order to do it. So shout out to her. Thank you, B.
Well, and we'd like to thank all of the commission members that took the time to volunteer and come out to our different events and gatherings during this very unusual Bike Month. So we're very happy we were able to do as much as we did. We also appreciate the partnership with Oaks and Spokes. They've proven to be a very strong partner on the programming front. So here's looking forward to walk over into 2022.
Nice work, everybody. Okay, moving on from reports, we will go to board comments and announcements and general board comments. So now is the time when we open up the floor and see if anybody has anything they'd like to add to the public record. So, Mr. Thomas.
I just wanted to follow up on my question from last month about the bike lane markings on Hillsborough Street. I think we were going to look at those and see. I think they were. That section of the street was transferred to city maintenance, I believe, when the project was completed. And as NC State looks forward to full operations in the fall, what that means, a lot of people using that corridor. And I just want to make sure that we're planning to have those bike lanes and the markings updated.
And we have passed that along to our traffic engineering division. They've added it to their long line program, which is part of our annual marking refresh work that they do across the city. So it'll be probably added into that next package.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gellin.
Mr. Thomas, if you don't mind me piggybacking off of that Hillsborough Street area, Mr. Lamb, the bike lane that currently is there is really in the door zone. It's physically uncomfortable. I rode the Person Street bike lane over the weekend, and the section that ran right along the parked vehicles is unnerving because of the door zone. Is it possible that Hillsborough Street could actually lower their speed limits and make it more of a bikeway, and the vehicles that enter it are guests? Because the speed is reduced to about 15 miles per hour, and convert the bike lanes into door zones for car users to enter and exit their vehicles?
I'll take it in two parts. So first, could the city lower the speed limit on Hillsborough Street? The answer is yes. Paul can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it's currently posted, which defaults to the citywide 35, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe it's got a special designation for that. So yes, the city could unilaterally lower the speed limit on Hillsborough Street. Moving the bike lanes outside the door zone probably can't be accomplished without removing the on-street parking. If your interest is in moving more towards a shared street concept at a slower speed, like 15 miles per hour, I don't know how that would be received by the community. There was a significant push. There were not bike lanes involved in the project when it initially went in 2010. It was based on public outcry that we went back and retroactively added bike lanes in 2011 based on community feedback. So there would need to be some substantial community feedback that the community wants the bike lanes out. Fortunately, our crash rate relative to bike crashes on Hillsborough Street is very good right now. So I think there'd have to be some discussions about the pros and cons of making that type of change. with the community at large.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to my comment.
Mr. Lamb, do we have any kind of statistics on dooring crashes? Is that something that the RPD would, since it's not a moving crash, would that show up in their statistics? It's
Specifically, if there is an injury and police are called, there is typically a crash report that is done as part of that, and you have that data. The issue becomes, and if there's a larger scale of underreported crashes of all types, and Paul Black, I don't know if you want to add anything on that front. We've talked about that a little bit in the past.
No, but I was just looking in the GIS to see what Hillsborough is posted at, and the data are incorrect because it's currently showing as 55.
Ms. Gallenbeck, I think that Hillsborough Street warrants an ongoing conversation. There's additional design work that's going to be done. Are we going to keep the bike lanes? What should the speed limit be? How are we going to get rid of all that parking? So it's nothing we're going to resolve tonight. I suggest that we keep this on our radar and bring it into one of the committees. Mr. Caruso?
Yeah, I would just real quick to add to the Hillsborough Street conversation. I mean, I agree that riding a bike on Hillsborough is not, I mean, it's better than a lot of streets, but it's not particularly comfortable. I agree that the facilities aren't great, but speed is relatively slow. I mean, I've ridden out there a few times, but if you're not going too fast, then people get impatient, and I've been honked at a few times. But I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind also is that Hillsborough Street, especially in that area that we're talking about, is a very high use transit corridor. There's 5 or 6 bus routes that run through there. So just as far as like street configuration, things like that, that's something that we need to be aware of as well. But I agree with the larger point that like commuting through there on a bike is not particularly comfortable, and it's kind of unfortunate that we don't really have a very obvious parallel route that runs along there.
Ms. Gallenbeck.
Thank you. So this is unrelated to Hillsborough Street. I wanted to bring attention to West Street, the intersection of West Street and West Johnson. West Street has right-of-way, and the vehicles that I've seen are, who are on Johnson Street approaching the intersection, they have to roll into the intersection. Their behavior is very fast, not deliberate, and consequently my husband almost hit on the weekend as he rode through that intersection. Or is it on the agenda that will become a 4-way stop to increase safety in all vehicles at the intersection?
So I'll go ahead and follow up on that. I believe going back and breaking up a little bit, but I believe you were requesting that we look at converting the intersection of Johnson and West to a 4-way stop. And there have been some conversations about that right now. And
yes.
That connection has been made through. We also are looking at reevaluating the treatment at Harrington and Johnson as well, which facilitates that free flow movement off of Capitol Boulevard. And we've determined that's a little problematic operationally for all users. And so I think there's some conversation long-term about whether or not those intersections, as now all the Smoky Hollow development comes online, whether or not there'll be any impetus to look at traffic signals for those intersections, as it again is becoming an extension of the downtown grid and that downtown development scale. Traffic signals may soon be warranted. But there's conversations right now definitely about potential for a 4-way stop.
That'd be great. Yeah, one of the things that I said was that my husband skidded to a stop because a vehicle pulled out in front of him as he was riding through. So I've seen close, it's been physically uncomfortable. So thank you for that. And I am glad that Ms. Johnson returned about Glenwood Avenue. Is it possible, Mr. Lamb, for Glenwood Avenue to receive, again, those stop signs, similar to what Boylan Avenue received to reduce their traffic calming a couple years back? The intersections where the Circle meets Glenwood and where Myrtle Avenue meets Glenwood, where Alexander meets Glenwood. Is it possible to just slow the traffic through stop signs?
Theoretically, yes. However, our traffic engineering staff follows federal warrants for the installation of stop signs, and there'd have to be some evaluation of that to see if they were warranted or not. Part of the removal of the traffic signals in along South Boylan specifically is because they were no longer warranted, because the traffic volumes were so low. So it had a traffic calming benefit to it, but it was not necessarily the number one impetus for that project.
Okay, thanks. Well, I wanted to pitch it. That's it. I appreciate everybody's patience with all my comments.
That's what we're here for. Or that's why we're here, maybe. Any more comments? Wonderful. All right. Upcoming event. Oh, B, please.
Upcoming events. That's
upcoming
all
events. You got. Yeah, we got the upcoming events. You're ready with the events, and let's go.
I'm ready. I'm ready. The BPAC retreat, August 13th, 1 to 5 at Walnut Creek Wetland Center. August 13th, 1 to 5 at Walnut Creek Wetland Center. You should have received something in email, but we will make sure that you get something, and we're excited to be able to be in person.
All right. Are there any more upcoming events anybody would like to
Well,
advertise?
speaking of in person and the upcoming committee meeting, where do we meet?
That's
council chambers.
We were discussing maybe keeping the committee, the small groups, virtual, and I think that's a good policy if we can do that. The full commission is going to have to go back in the room to comply with all the rules, but
That room is the council,
it is the council room. We sit at the big table.
the big one.
But as far as your committee meetings, I'm not aware of any limitations on having committee meetings virtually.
Ms. Hester.
Well, I will point out that if we do keep committees virtual, which I'm all for, we'll just need to look at the timing for planning, because it's not like do it virtual and then be magically downtown at the council chambers at the same time. So, I mean, and I think that meeting's actually scheduled because of me, and I'm happy to change that. I don't know what the process is, but we should, I guess, Pierre's talk about it and figure out.
Yeah, we can talk offline about that.
Perfect.
Good point.
Yeah, just pointing it out.
We can sit
I actually have to make sure
public Wi-Fi.
And I have to make sure that the room is actually reserved.
All the stuff's coming back. All right. So I look forward to seeing everybody in person at the council chambers in July for our next meeting. And what date is that? Does anybody? That's probably my responsibility to know that.
Dwight, I have a question or comment or whatever.
Sure, go ahead, please.
As far as since it's going to be our next meeting, if the next commission meeting is going to be in person, can we? I don't know if this is legally possible or what, but if we move to in-person meetings, is there a way for us to continue doing public comment virtually, or does us going back to in-person require us to take in-person comments only?
I will follow up with Eric about that. I don't think it's going to be very easy to do. Council is dealing with the same thing, and it's hard to run a meeting in person and be the liaison for staff and also administer the WebEx meeting and then be in charge of the tech of getting that up on the screen so everybody in the public in-person meeting can see the virtual stuff on the screens. That's a really tall order. I mean,
yeah, it's not just a matter of the WebEx, but how that plugs into the council chamber system and whatnot. Logistically, it's a high hurdle. Anytime that anyone ever wants to make public comments and submit written comments, staff is happy to read those into the record. So there's no limitation on that. Folks can email us comments and say, I'd like to have these read as a BPAC meeting. We can certainly facilitate that. That's no problem.
thank you both. And so the next BPAC meeting will be July 19th, Monday, July 19th at 6 p.m. And with that,
so hopefully this is our last virtual BPAC meeting.
Wow. Yeah, I hope so too. And with that, I will go ahead and call a close to the last virtual BPAC meeting, hopefully of 2021. Thank you, everybody, and I'll talk to everybody soon. Bye.